Hi, everybody. Today's Thursday, June 26, 2025, and our friend Alex Krainer is back with us. Welcome back, Alex.
Good to be with you again, Nima. Thank you for the invite and greetings to your viewers.
Alex, I think it would be interesting to start with what has happened between Iran and Israel. Israeli attack on Iran, then American attack. What has happened during the war, 12 days of war between Iran and Israel? They started so quick and surprising. They somehow attacked Iran, killed many Iranian commanders, and during the war, it was a little bit more than a week, and the United States, together with Germany, provided Israel with 14 weapon shipments in such a short period of time of fighting Iranians. And at the end, we saw the United States getting involved and hitting targets within Iran, targeting the Iranian nuclear facilities. It seems that the United States somehow tried to put an end to the conflict because they saw nothing good is coming out of this for Israel. Your take on what has happened and the way that you look at the mainstream media all over, they're bragging how greatly they defeated Iran. Your take on that?
Yes, well, I'll have to go out on a limb again a little bit, Nima, but I have to confess, my brain has started to hurt from trying to figure out what's going on. But I think that there is a method to Trump's madness, and the reason why I had the impression that all of this was fake, that it was all choreographed, is for two main lines of thinking. First one was because the United States going to war with Iran was so staggeringly stupid that it made no sense whatsoever. And even if you go along with those analysts out there who are saying that Trump is not too bright and that he's shallow and he doesn't analyze things and that he gets easily misled by whoever was the last person who talked to him, even then it's so staggeringly stupid that I thought this cannot possibly be it, because the risks of getting involved in a war with Iran were cataclysmic. And the benefits, I can't really see what the benefits would be exactly, other than maybe providing another short lease of life to Benjamin Netanyahu's regime, saving him from his political death and probably imprisonment. The other line of thinking is that what Trump has done, if we judge it purely on the surface appearances of things, is completely at odds with Trump's positions that he has conveyed explicitly, not just over the last 6 months of his administration, but his whole political life from the first administration until now. He's been consistently trying to extricate the United States from being the global policeman for the empire. In 2017, he wanted to withdraw US troops from Afghanistan and from Syria and from Europe as well. And he's not a very loyal member of the NATO alliance. And he has a lot of resentment towards European power and Britain. And so now suddenly he's carrying water for them in this major undertaking that for the United States can only spell a disaster. It just didn't make any sense. And so, many people were saying, well, he received money from, Israeli donors, from Ms. Adelson and so forth. She gave him $100 million. And I thought, yeah, and so what? She wouldn't be the first donor to get swindled and not get what she wanted to and hoped for, right? So that doesn't say much to me. And then, there's another belief that I think is not questioned enough out there, and that is the belief that Donald Trump is just completely loyal and devoted to Israel, which, I don't see it exactly, particularly with regards to Benjamin Netanyahu. Everybody seems to think that Donald Trump is subservient to Netanyahu and that Netanyahu is actually in charge. Well, I think that's not correct. I don't think that's true. In 2020, when the US elections were stolen from under Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu was the first statesman in the world who called up Joe Biden to congratulate him on winning the elections 3 hours before the final results were even announced. And as we remember, who are old enough to remember, there was a lot of doubts about the elections. There was a lot of people thought that the election was stolen, which, as it turns out, they were stolen. So I very much doubt that, Donald Trump just forgot about this or thinks like, yeah, water under the bridge. My Benjamin Netanyahu is my best friend, my brother, and I will do anything for him, including having an aircraft carrier sunk in the Persian Gulf with 5,000 sailors on it. Would Trump want this to happen on his watch? I think that's just unthinkable to my mind. It would be the end of him. It would be the end of US influence in that region, and it would be the end of Israel as well. So I thought that if there is an attack of any kind, that it would probably be a fake one. And I do believe that the attack that we saw was a fake one. The Americans, whether through the Russians, whether through the Omanis or the Swiss embassy, it seems that they informed the Iranians that the attack was coming. They gave them 2 to 3 days to evacuate sensitive equipment and the stockpile of enriched uranium elsewhere. Now nobody knows where it is. And then they made a couple of holes in the country, in the landscape of Iran, but apparently without any substantial damage to the nuclear program. So either there was a negligible damage or maybe no damage at all. And so that was fake, it appears to be. And then the Iranian retaliation was equally fake, meaning, the Iranians called up the US representative and said, like, okay, we're going to launch a counterattack. Are you ready? Make sure you evacuate everybody so that nobody gets hurt. And that's what happened. And then Trump, in the aftermath of the attacks, Trump was very complimentary to Iranians and actually thanked them for doing it in this way, so that no major damage was done and no U.S. servicemen died. And then we had the follow-up with, to my mind, this fight between Iran and Israel and the United States was as real as the World Wrestling Federation's fight. And then the rhetoric, the trash talk between them, same thing. There's like this big trash talk, but when you look at what actually happened, something very close to nothing actually happened. And now, next week, they're going to be negotiating with Iran again, the Americans. They're going to be talking to the Iranians. That's what Trump said, right? But strangely, he said, I don't think we need to talk about the nuclear program anymore. So what are they going to be talking about? I think we have to read between the lines. Trump, in one of his statements on Air Force One, when he was heading to the NATO summit, he said, they asked him, did you want to see a regime change in Iran? And he said, like, no, I don't want that. That would be chaos. And again, he said some complimentary thing. He said, Iranians are great tradesmen. They're great businessmen. They got a lot of oil. We can do business with them. They can be a very prosperous nation. So that's very, very different from, this imperative to bring down the regime in Iran, which is what the Israelis and the European powers desperately wanted. And then, on the same occasion, also speaking to the journalist on Air Force One, before he took off to the summit, he said he was not happy with the Israelis because he said, you have 12 hours to finish up your operations, wind it all down, and then we have peace. And then he said, well, within the first hour, the Israelis launched the biggest bombing raid ever. And he said, I'm not very happy with the Iranians. And then, as we learned later, apparently he called Benjamin Netanyahu and ordered him to recall the aircrafts back to Israel to turn around and call off the attack. And apparently Benjamin Netanyahu obeyed. So, this is a different game, because I think that pretty much since John F. Kennedy, no major U.S. politician has issued any strong public criticism of Israel, which Donald Trump just did. So, and then, then it gets better, because then he goes to the NATO summit. And there he just absolutely shocked everyone, because they asked him like, what about Article 5? Because everybody in NATO is desperate to have an affirmation from the United States that they remain committed to the alliance, and that if the Europeans start a big war against Russia, that the Americans will come to their aid. And rather than saying, oh yes, Article 5 absolutely, we're there, he said, well, depends on your definition of Article 5. And then he said, that there's different definitions. So, I don't know. So I think that later he made another statement where he said oh yeah, we're with them all the way. And so, typical Trump, very contradictory statements. But, if he were committed and devoted to this alliance, then he would unequivocally say, oh yes, absolutely, Article 5, if an attack on one is an attack on all, and of course the United States is going to back up her allies. Instead, he said, depends on your definition. And obviously the Europeans are absolutely in a shock. Poor Mark Rutte ended up calling Donald Trump daddy, please don't abandon us. But the effect of Trump's action, as mad as it appears on the surface, seems to be consistent with his positions, and that is the dismantling of the post World War II global order, and this is unmistakable.
Alex, what I think about the way that the things have happened between Iran and Israel, and eventually with the United States, it was, in my opinion, that the government in Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu and his administration, were preparing for this attack for many years, for more than a decade. They proposed this to Donald Trump, that we're ready. Iran is defeated. Last time we attacked Iran, we destroyed everything, and right now we can bring some sort of change to the political parties in Iran. We can do regime change. Let us do this. And if I were Donald Trump, looking at the situation, so if Israel gonna defeat Iran, that's good for me. If Iran gonna defeat Israel, that's good for me as well, because that would bring some sort of defeat to Israel. They're gonna understand their position. They're gonna understand they're not capable of doing the things that they're talking about, that they have been planning for. It was a win, by the way, defeating Iran or somehow being defeated by Iran. It was a win for Donald Trump. And do you feel that it was the same in the mind of Donald Trump?
Not exactly, Nima, although it's possible that he was hedging his bet. Maybe he needed to see the immediate aftermath of Israeli attacks. you know, whether the regime was going to fall, whether they were going to be able to retaliate, you know, whether they were going to be able to regroup, reactivate their air defenses, their missile program, and so forth. And so maybe he didn't want to run out in front of that. That's possible. But I think that for him, this is a win. And I think that the fall of Iranian regime wouldn't necessarily be a win. In fact, I think long term it will be a disaster because, you know, if Israel won and Iran lost, if the regime fell, well, that pretty much, I think, means more forever wars in the Middle East. You know, it would be almost chronically and permanently destabilized. And in this situation, it's always the United States that's called on to be the, you know, security guarantor to intervene with blunt force when it's necessary to intervene. And then, you know, it's not just Israel, it's not just Iran. You know, Syria is still a sore festering wound in the Middle East, which could slip into a civil war any day. And then again, you know, the United States is exposed there because they have alliance with the Kurds. They are still allied with the Free Syrian Army proxy force, which is now, you know, reduced, but it's still there. And then they still have this problem with the Turks because the U.S. relationship with Erdogan's government is not very good, and there's a risk that if civil war breaks out in Syria, they will find themselves on the opposite side with the Turks, which would be a really, really bad outcome for the United States because you have, you know, they would actually be obliged to align with Iran because there's who else? They have Israelis there, but Israel is spent. Israel is completely overstretched, with enemies to the south, to the east, and to the north. And then you have HTS, al-Nusra, and all of these jihadi groups aligned with Turkey and the UK, which are actually on the opposite side of the United States. So the situation is extremely complicated, and it risks to become a lot more complicated still for the United States. And then who's on your side if that happens? You don't have many partners there. You know, Russia is barely present, but Russia would be a candidate. Russia, on the other hand, is aligned with Iran. So Iran would be the logical ally in Syria to the United States. So I think that the calculus definitely favors preserving Iran and its current government and letting Israel just hang itself, because Israel at this point is a cost and a liability to the United States in every way, you know, militarily, financially, in terms of reputation, diplomatically, in every sense. You know, you're Benjamin Netanyahu's government is absolutely toxic. They are on bad terms with everybody in the world, with the exception, of course, with the likes of, you know, the British government, the German government, the French government, who themselves are extremely unpopular with their own people. So it's all kind of resting on very, very thin ice, and it's all going to implode at some point. You know, I think there's no question about saving Israel and then bringing it back to its former glory. Israel has been strategically defeated in this exchange of blows with Iran because, you know, they blew up the Ben Gurion airport. They blew up their three big ports. I mean, you know, the Yemen is already destroyed pretty much and pushed into bankruptcy, the Eilat port. But now Haifa and Ashdod have been, if not destroyed, severely damaged. The oil refinery, the power stations. I would also say this. Israel is a massive liability because they now have only one card to play. And that one card is the Samson option. And so they're extremely dangerous, not only to Iran, they're extremely dangerous to the whole region and to the United States. And this is the reason why I suspect, I have no evidence, it's just a hunch, that remember how just days before Israelis launched an attack, we learned that the Iranians have a couple of terabytes of detailed data about the Israeli nuclear program. My suspicion is, of course, it's possible that Iranians have a very capable intelligence service and that they got this themselves. But my suspicion is that they might have gotten it from the United States. You know, Tulsi Gabbard is the DIA chief today under Trump. I think that after Witkoff returned from Iran, thinking that he got a deal and saying, oh, hey, the Iranians have agreed to limit their uranium enrichment program to 3.7%. So it's the problem solved. And then, you know, this pro-Zionist crowd in the United States wanted his head and Pete Hegseth's head on a stake. And I think that at that point, people in the Trump team realized that they cannot take these people frontally. You know, they cannot take them head on. So then what do you do? What do you do when you're in front of a stampeding herd? You can stand there and get run over, and Trump was already being vulnerable to another impeachment proceeding, or you can put yourself at the head of that stampeding herd and then run them off course. You know, take charge of the stampede and direct it where you want it to go, rather than to a total war against Iran. And I think that they must have probably communicated with the Iranians to say, look, we can't hold these people back. It's going to get ugly. Please ignore the rhetoric that comes out from our administration. It's going to sound awful. But here's a little token of good faith. And then they give him the disc with all this stuff. And so now the Iranians are capable of, perhaps, I don't know this, you know, but maybe they put the Iranians in the position to preempt the Samson option, to be able to destroy Israeli nukes before they launch. It's only a hunch. I think that maybe we'll know a bit more about this with time if a new Mordecai Vanunu emerges in Israel. But at the moment, we can only guess. And my guess is that a lot of what Trump did has been deliberate, and the outcome seems very consistent with his positions about the US role in the world. Let's remember, they explicitly said the post-war global order is obsolete. Multipolar integrations are the new reality, and the United States is ready to embrace the multipolar integrations. Before I wrap up, I wanted to say another thing. Trump said that he wasn't interested in imposing new sanctions on Iran, and they've already lifting some of the sanctions that have been imposed previously. This is not exactly clear, but then Steve Witkoff gave an interview, I think yesterday or the day before, and he said, yeah, we did that because that was Iran's condition for not retaliating. So Iranians wanted the lifting of certain sanctions. But at the same time, Witkoff also said, this was our message to the Chinese. He said, we are ready to make deals. Which, you know, if you translate it, it is exactly the US embracing the multipolar integrations. Since the 19th of May, Trump has spoken with Putin 3 times, and they were all long conversations. They were not just courtesy calls, how are you doing? They were all close to an hour or more than an hour. So they're discussing very substantive issues. And then, you know, we're lifting sanctions from Iran. It's a message to the Chinese. So I think that we're looking at a dismantling of the rules-based global order. I think that the United States comes out a winner long term from this. Iran comes out the winner. Russia and China come out a winner, and Great Britain, European Union, France, and Israel are losers.
Since you've mentioned the Samson option, I think look at Israel today in the aftermath of the war with Iran. Look at the scene, look at the buildings being destroyed, and you see something that you haven't seen before, but in Gaza. It's the same. Look at the pictures. And we know that how they have been successful in censoring everything coming out of Israel, while we had Iranians going out and filming everything. They hit the target, and we see the explosion in the building, but it's nothing similar to what has happened to Israel. And let's assume something happened to Israel, an Iranian attack on Israel, instead of Israel attacking Iran. If with this sort of destruction happening in Israel, they would go after nuclear bombs to attack Iran. But with what has happened, because they attacked Iran, they were in a weaker position. They couldn't talk about Samson option because they attacked Iran. And with all those suffering happening in Israel, you talk about their economy, the way that they hit the bases in Israel, the ports in Israel. It's somehow Donald Trump achieved something, in my opinion, with Israel that no one else could achieve with Israel, putting them in a weak position to accept whatever the president of the United States is advocating for.
Yes, it definitely appears so, Nima. And I think the one thing that we learned about Iranian missile program on the back of this 12-day war is that the Iranians have excellent intelligence about where to strike, and B, their missiles are shockingly accurate. So they have struck exactly where they wanted to strike. They struck the two major centers of the Ministry of the Interior. They struck the headquarters of the Mossad. They struck the airfields that they wanted. The refinery next to Haifa port. We don't really know because, as you said, the Israelis have immediately clamped down so that there can be no serious damage assessment from the ground. But they wouldn't do that if there was no damage. They would proudly show how, like, hey, look at these Iranians, they're incapable. They didn't even hit anything of any importance. And in the what was it in October or so or last date, I forget, when the Iranians made just for show, they sent a barrage of rockets. The Israelis were very quick to show how ineffective the Iranian rocket attack was. Now. And it wasn't ineffective. They even dug up some holes, which we could see later in the photographs. They dug up some holes like in the middle of an airfield to show how inaccurate the strike was. This time they are really hiding their wounds, which tells you that they sustained very, very heavy damage. And then now this means that Israel shouldn't even dream about going to war against Iran ever again unless they do it with nuclear weapons. But if they do that, it's game over. It's finished. The world will never forgive, never forget. And I think even the Europeans are going to say, hey, that's not okay. There's no going back from that. And as mad, as insane as Netanyahu is, along with the Smotrich and Ben Gvir and all of those people, I still think that this is a bridge too far. And I think that the political top might be fanatical enough to say, launch the missiles, but there's a hierarchy of people there who might not want further retaliation from Iran, sorry. And then, I think that the Iranians and the Americans and the Russians are probably going to have an intelligence of such an order and might be able to stop it.
Alex, here are the targets that Iranian used. You look at the picture, and all these regions during the fight, many people were somehow putting out that Iran is going to attack the American embassy in Jerusalem. It was so much fantastic, this sort of thinking. But you see that nowhere close to Jerusalem. They didn't hit Jerusalem because Iran, the official policy of Iran is not hitting Jerusalem. They don't do that. They never do that. And when it comes, Alex, to the way that the American try to, Donald Trump said that we have the Iranian nuclear program has been totally obliterated. What's your take on the way that Donald Trump interfered in the fight? Is that because to put an end to the conflict because he saw nothing good is coming out of this, or maybe seeing Israel the way that he wanted Israel to be, that's enough, let's go and put some sort of, because it was somehow surprising coming out and saying that by, I don't know, by 4 a.m. or 7 a.m. Israel, everything going to be gone and we're going to have a ceasefire. And yesterday he was asked about if the fight going to continue again. He said, so what they're going to do? They did everything they were able to do. He was talking about Israel. So what else they can do? He literally said that that was the maximum of their power, their capability to go against Iran. Nothing more than that.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I think, I think that we talked about this in the past, Nima, that, the whole point of Israel attacking Iran was to draw the United States into the quagmire, because Israel, I keep saying the wrong one. Israel knows that they are no match for Iran. The whole point was to draw a reprisal, and then to say to the Americans, oh, look what they do to us. You have to come to our aid. And Trump said, like, no, you're on your own. You're done. You're finished. Stop with the attacks and focus on your own country, to rebuild your own country, fix it up, make peace with your neighbors. And so I think that this is exactly what we saw happen. I think that now, if there's a regime change in the region, the candidate number one is in fact Israel. The problem is that nobody knows what happens then. If Benjamin Netanyahu's government falls, which it looks like it's very likely to do, then who knows what comes next, and then you might end up having a civil war in Israel itself. And I shudder to even try to predict what that might look like. But I think that very probably we're looking at Henry Kissinger's prediction that there's not going to be any Israel very soon. And then, we're looking at a one-state solution. So I think that the Israeli people who are willing and able to live with their Christian and Muslim neighbors as equal constituent people of that region, they will stay. The people who can't help themselves to hate and kill Muslims, Palestinians, they will have to go. They will have to, emigrate. And we've seen many of them emigrate. One of them, did you see the footage of one of these Israelis from Belarus? He saw a little child from Iran, and his impulse was to go and kill that child in a Moscow airport. Well, people like that are not going to stay. And so I think that we're going to get a one-state solution, and we'll see what that state is going to be called. Maybe it's going to be called Palestine again. But it's going to be different. It's not going to be a British colonial dependency, or a French colonial dependency, or Ottoman colonial dependency. It might just be a sovereign nation. Of course, a lot of things can get deeply complicated from here. This has just been the first gambit. Syria is still an issue which we don't know how it might play out.
What has happened in the aftermath of Iranian attack on American bases in Qatar? And it was somehow amazing, all these Arab states coming out and condemning Iran. When this war started, I was thinking how Donald Trump can convince these Arab states that they did everything for Donald Trump. They invested, they gave money to Donald Trump personally. How Donald Trump can convince them to get along with the American fight, with the American attack on Iran? It seems that those Arab states knew about what's coming up, what would happen, that the United States would not get involved. We were so much concerned about the United States getting involved in a new direct war in the Middle East. But with the attack on Qatar and the way that the Qatar came out and talked with Iranian, they have somehow the connection between, they were the connection between Americans and Iranians while they've been attacked by Iranians. It was somehow all prepared, in my opinion. They have coordinated with even Arab states.
I think that's likely, Nima. I think that would make sense. It wouldn't make sense to me that everybody was taken by surprise. I think everybody knew what was coming. So the Americans knew, and I think that the Saudis knew, and maybe Qataris knew as well. And I think that all these public statements that come in the immediate aftermath, I'm inclined to almost ignore them, because they're part of that trash talk that keeps going on. And I think that it's better to focus on what actually gets done. What are the ultimate results of all these actions? And if we don't see a renewed hostility between Saudi Arabia and Iran, then it's all just talk. It's all just for public consumption. And so far, we've seen the opposite. The Saudis are supportive of Iran, not the strike on U.S. bases in Qatar. But I think there's a big public observing all these events. So you do your token PR statements and you move on. And next week we're going to see renewed talks between Americans and the Iranians. It seems to me that the Iranians have expressed readiness to engage with the American government. If this week's attacks were real, then they wouldn't talk to them, right? IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, dealt in bad faith with the Iranians. They're throwing them out. If the American government, if Trump's government was dealing in bad faith with the Iranians, they wouldn't engage with them. They wouldn't discuss anything with them. And Trump also even said that, the nuclear program, there's no need to discuss that anymore. We can just set that aside. And I think that this is the reason why part of the trash talk has to be, we've completely obliterated their nuclear program. It's gone. It's just like nothing there anymore. Of course, everybody knows that this is not true, but you have to maintain that position in order to go and discuss other things. And Trump's talking, hey, Iranians are good tradesmen. They're good businessmen. They have lots of oil. I'm eager to talk to them and make a deal. And then, from the point of view of the Israelis, Benjamin Netanyahu is politically so desperate that he jumped on Trump's fake attack on Iran almost immediately and thanked Trump profusely. And, this action that we together planned and executed and obliterated Iranian nuclear program and all these wonderful things. He can't disown it now. I mean, they even draped buildings in Israel with portraits of Donald Trump with logos, statements. Thank you, Mr. President. They can't climb down from that. He can't come up before the Israeli public and say, oh, I guess I was duped. Now what? We're screwed. We're completely painted into the corner and there's no way out. I mean, no way out other than the Samson option, but there's nothing left for Israel to do here. All they can do is go and kill more Palestinian women and children. and maybe lob some missiles into Lebanon and in at Damascus. I don't know what else, but their gambit against Iran is finished. It's spent. And, the fact that they used the nuclear program as a pretext, that was the pretext, that was the rationale for the attack. That's now with the position that like it's the nuclear program is destroyed. Now they no longer have that pretext. Of course, we know that the ultimate objective really was the regime change, but for public consumption, it was the nuclear program. And now yesterday, we saw that even the CIA and the Israelis both issued a statement agreeing that, yes, we agree Iranian nuclear program was destroyed. So you no longer have the pretext. You no longer have an acceptable rationale for perpetuating hostility against Iran, the Iranians. So that's, for Benjamin Netanyahu, I think that's game over.
The outcome of the war against Iran was that, Alex, when you look at the Iranian society since the Iraq war, the war between Iran and Iraq, we haven't seen this sort of unity being presented, being existed within the Iranian society. It's something new coming up after many years, and they're feeling something new. And the other side, the unity has increased inside Iran. And the other hand, these groups, NGOs, this work of NGOs, oppositions, and one of them was the son of Shah of Iran coming out and coordinated with the Israeli government, trying to convince people to remember the name of the operation, Israeli operation in Iran, was Rising Lions. And I would argue the idea came from these people, these opposition close to could be the son of Shah of Iran, to talk with Iran and to communicate with Iranian. He did everything coming up, and in the mainstream media, you look at the way that he was talking. Fox News in mainstream media came out on his YouTube channel, and all the other Persian language channels outside Iran, they were trying to do everything, diminishing what Iran was doing against Israel, and exaggerating the way that I've never seen before, even with the war in Ukraine, that Israel is destroying everything with Iran, and the government is collapsing in 2 days, in 8 hours, and something like this. And when I look at the situation inside Iran and outside Iran, with the position and the unity inside Iran, see, nothing bad has happened to Iran. Of course, some targets were hit inside Iran, physical targets were hit. But when it comes to the morale, when it comes to the unity inside Iran and weakening the position outside Iran, it was totally in benefit of Iran.
Well, yes, and I'm not surprised. Look, I think that the Iranian people, like all people around the world, have seen too much. We've seen the regime change after regime change after regime change. We see that it's followed by chaos, by massive bloodshed. Iranian people have seen what happened in Syria, what happened in Lebanon, what happened in Gaza, what is happening still in the West Bank. They've seen how their allies in Yemen are being treated by the Western powers. And they probably remember the regime of Pahlavi's father. And of course, they also understand that when the West is talking about bringing democracy to Iran and freedom and all these things, well, they're not stupid. You don't bring democracy on the back of bombs and then install a foreign imposed supposed king on the people. That's hardly democracy, right? That's only democracy in the empire of lies. So I think it's very easy to see through all this. And then it's also very easy to see that it's actually the current government in Iran which is defending Iran's sovereignty and independence, that is also the only force in the region that is the real regional force. I'm not talking about Ansar Allah, which have acted honorably in defense of the Palestinian people, but they see that Iran is the only regional power that has been acting consistently in favor of the Palestinian people, has been supporting to the axis of resistance. And we have to remember, when we talk about the axis of resistance to what? It's resistance to Western colonialism. And Western colonialism brings nothing but death, misery, wars, and ruthless exploitation to people wherever they manage to establish their dominance. So I think that there's keen awareness that the government in Tehran today is the only thing standing between the Western imperialists and the Iranian people. And then, the damage that Israel was able to do was superficial, I guess. Iran is a massive size country. It's like the size of half of Europe, 92 million people, very large military, huge output of highly educated people, engineers, IT technicians, software engineers, and it can very quickly recover from any superficial injuries that it sustains. Whereas Israel is not nearly as well. Israel is actually quite the opposite. If you remove US and NATO support, Israel is pretty much nothing. They can't supply themselves with enough bombs, with enough air defense missiles and systems, with enough aircraft. For all of these things, they largely depend on the United States, on Britain, on Germany, and other NATO countries. So, Trump is saying, yeah, I'm not interested. I want to deal with, I want to cut a deal with the Iranians. I want to cut a deal with the Chinese, with the Russians. I want to embrace multipolar integrations. Well, then, daddy just abandoned the naughty child. And that naughty child has no future then.
Alex, yesterday, Donald Trump was asked by a Ukrainian reporter. She was working for BBC, and she asked Donald Trump if they're going to send Patriot batteries to Ukraine. Here is what she asked Donald Trump.
BBC News Ukrainian.
Where are you from?
I'm from Ukraine.
Oh,
so my
wow.
question to you is whether or not the US is ready to sell anti-air missile systems Patriot to Ukraine. We know that Russia has been pounding Ukraine really heavily right now.
Are you living yourself now in Ukraine?
My husband is there.
Wow.
And
I can see you're very, it's amazing.
And me with the kids, I'm in Warsaw actually, because he wanted me to be.
Is your husband a soldier? No?
He's
there now?
Yeah.
Wow. That's rough stuff, right? That's tough. And you're living here?
In Warsaw.
And you're a reporter?
I am.
Good. So let me just tell you, they do want to have the missiles, okay, as they call them, the Patriots. And we're going to see if we can make some available, They're very hard to get. We need them too. We were supplying them to Israel, and they're very effective, 100% effective. Hard to believe how effective. And they do want that more than any other thing, as you probably know. That's a very good question, and I wish you a lot of luck. I mean, I can see it's very upsetting to you. So,
Alex, Ukraine is done. I don't see Donald Trump going to Congress asking for any sort of aid to Ukraine. I think by now they know that, and I don't know if the Europeans are anywhere close to what Donald Trump is talking about.
I agree, Nima. I think that Ukraine also is spent. It's finished, and I don't think whatever patriots Trump might be able to scrape from some bottom of the barrel somewhere, like they recently sent Israel's very old Patriot missiles and launchers to Ukraine. I don't know if that's even a little bit effective, let alone 100% effective. And so I don't know where they're going to find this stuff. I don't think they have them. And I don't think that Trump wants to send it because he wants to rebuild United States defenses, which have also been largely depleted. I think that the Western powers have done what they could to support Ukraine. And I think that even if they wanted to, even if they said like, yes, we're going to give Ukraine everything that we have and everything that we can, what's the point? Because, the Russians are not sending a missile here and there, and then you shoot it down, and then you say, okay, that we dodged that bullet. They're sending hundreds of drones. They're sending these hypersonic missiles that can be intercepted, the Kinjals, the Patriots, their production is limited. They're very expensive, and they get depleted very rapidly in any one of these missile and drone raids. So there's no point. Like Israel, Ukraine has been strategically defeated, and there's no reversing that defeat, and no number of Patriot missiles can make any change in that. So, Trump there, he kind of established a personal rapport with this young woman, and, he sees that she's from Ukraine, that her husband is still there in the Ukrainian forces. Of course, he's not going to tell her, I don't care, your husband can get burned to a crisp for all I care. He's not going to say that. But he obviously kind of dodged the questions. We'll see what we can do. And then, when they see, they're going to say, there's no point doing anything, make peace. Make peace now. Later is going to be worse. So they're not going to give them any Patriots, probably.
Alex, the outcome of NATO meeting is that, because yesterday the Secretary General of NATO said that we're prepared to support Ukraine more for 10 years to come. And who's running NATO? Who's giving? He said, "Daddy is not interested. Daddy talked to them." But who's the second daddy to them? To what's going on?
There is no second daddy. The British are trying to fill the void, but the British, the whole British military can can fit into Wembley Stadium with a lot of seats unfilled. The British want to reinsert themselves and lead the charge, but they don't have anything that their focus is on, British and the Europeans, on, let's say, enabling Ukraine to become the major producer of new military technologies, and they want to produce drones. But that's not going to reverse the course of this war. All they can do with those drones is continue to harass Russia and send these drone bombing raids, and to try to, they can't defeat Russia, but maybe, if they continue with terror attacks, with the sabotage attacks, with these drone raids, then maybe they can destabilize the Russian government enough that they could maybe dream up a regime change, topple Vladimir Putin, install some new Zelensky there, or a new Boris Yeltsin, and then do a regime change like they fantasized about doing in Iran. But I don't think that's going to work, and I think that in the end, NATO is going to disintegrate. And I think that the message from Trump that he might or might not honor Article 5 if it's triggered is a very clear message to all of them. You don't have a solution here. And he said, NATO doesn't work without the United States. Maybe in the future it will somehow, we don't know, but without us, it doesn't work. And, they all know that it doesn't work. And, whatever the French and the British think they can do doesn't add up to anything. So it's drones. And then, again, French and British fantasies about creating a nuclear umbrella, about revamping their nuclear arsenals and all this. But it's too little too late. It's, the strategic defeat has already happened. And, now they're dreaming up ways of reversing that, but it's not realistic without the United States. And even with the United States, it's still not realistic. And I think that Trump is being smart to extricate the United States from that, because ultimately it's all to the greatest cost in treasure and blood and weaponry to the United States. And Europeans just want to ride along to take the greatest spoil of wars after partitioning and regime changing Russia. But that's not happening.
Alex, defense ministers of Russia, China, and Iran, they're going to meet in Beijing under SCO framework. We were talking about the security. It seems that when it comes, it is the first time that I see the defense ministers are gathering under SCO, a SCO framework. What is the main, if you were to mention the main concerns on the part of these three countries, what would those concerns be in terms of the way that they're trying to make some sort of buffer zone, if you would like, if some sort of comfort for their countries in the next in future and in the time being?
I think that their main focus is terrorism and separatist movements, and I think that they've even spelled that out in a set of documents that they drafted last year at some point. I forget exactly, but this is specifically named actions against terrorism, separatism, and these regime change operations that are being, triggered in different countries. And I think that they intend to combat this. Obviously, there's going to be intelligence work, but they are revamping. Well, they are advancing rapid reaction forces, the likes of which intervened when there was an attempt to regime change in Kazakhstan recently. And so I think that's going to be their main concern, because neither China nor Russia, Russia to a lesser extent, but the chief risk is not like a frontal war. If now all of the armies of NATO in Europe, even if you suppose that the United States joins them fully, they cannot take on Russia head on. They would lose. It would end up with the large-scale destruction of the European continent. Britain wouldn't escape it. The United States wouldn't escape it. So there's no point in doing that. The risk is sabotage, terrorism, separatism, regime change efforts, espionage, and then obviously the nuclear option. But the nuclear option is still, the Russians and the Chinese, they have the deterrent, so that's already there. But the danger of these types of attack, as we saw this month on Russia, where they attacked their nuclear bomber fleet, that's a risk. Biological warfare is a risk. They might attack with the biological agents. Versions of opium war are a risk, because the British have more than a century and a half experience running opium wars, and so that's always a risk that they might infiltrate your government with drugs, drug dealer networks, and so forth. And still the cultivation of the jihadi groups, which will come and act as terror gangs if need be, as we saw in Russia when we had the Crocus Hall attack and the killing of almost 150 completely innocent civilians in the middle of Moscow. So that's I think going to be the chief focus of SCO defense against Western powers.
Alex, here is what Fars news agency in Iran reported, that Israel may have used depleted uranium munitions during its recent strikes on targets in Iran. I think if they prove that, that would be a huge, that would bring some sort of huge consequences for Israel, because we are witnessing a war between Ukraine and Russia for more than 3 years. Nobody used these sort of munitions against the other, but they're using something new for a war that lasted to 12 days. And I don't know if that would bring some sort of repercussion in the international community. And we've learned that the Iranian parliament have passed they want to end the cooperation with the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA. They don't want to, because of what has happened in Iran, show how they were cooperating with Netanyahu and his administration. Is that going to change the way that the countries would see IAEA? Is that going to, because they part of this operation, which was huge in my opinion, which was important, which was so much, hurt so much the Iranian society, was the killing of Iranian scientists during this operation.
Well, with regards to depleted uranium, I don't think it's going to make any difference. NATO has used depleted uranium in Serbia in 1999, and the U.S. forces have used a lot of depleted uranium in Iraq, in Basra and in Fallujah. It's extraordinarily malicious. It's unnecessary, and it has horrific consequences. In Serbia, there's been an explosion in cancers and birth defects, and we saw a lot of all that also in Fallujah. Yet there's what do you do about this? You can't undo it. And how do you seek accountability? I think and I hope that this will lead to elimination of these types of weapons. I don't know if IAEA can be helpful in this regard. I mean, they've obviously shown now that they are very compromised and infiltrated, and they're partisan in this conflict. They have dealt in very bad faith with regards to Iran. So either the agency is going to have to be thoroughly restructured and reorganized to purge this element that's working for the Western powers and for Israel, or it's not going to exist anymore. Something else will have to take its place. I think that with respect to Iran and Serbia, it didn't reflect badly on IAEA, but the experience in Iran, I think, should be a wake-up call to everyone in the world that we need to move the world towards complete elimination of nuclear weapons. And I think that today that's realistic, because even in terms of having strategic deterrent, technologies like hypersonic missiles are much more effective, and they are much more powerful because if they allow you to accurately target actual military and strategic targets, rather than what the United States has done in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, wiping out a whole city and hundreds of thousands of people living there who are civilians, who are not military targets. And then today's nuclear weapons, even the tactical ones are much more powerful than the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And then, if we talk about larger strategic nuclear weapons, it's just unthinkable to even come to the point of using them at all. It's unnecessary. It's very destructive. It only guarantees that everybody loses. So, my personal hope and prayer is that Trump is successful in his dealings with the Iranians, with the Russians, with the Chinese, and that they form together a common front that's going to push everybody else in the world, Israel included, Britain included, France included, India and Pakistan included, to give up the nuclear weapons and to give up ammunitions like the ones that contain depleted uranium. Because the consequences are forever practically, and they're absolutely horrific. If Iranians responded to Israel in kind, well, then it would render Israel unlivable. So that we'll see what happens. I don't have high hopes of IAEA, but I do have high hopes of multipolar integrations, particularly if Trump is sincere in embracing these, and we'll find out through the rest of his term and his negotiations with Iran, with Russia, and with China. And I think that we see readiness on the part of these nations to engage with the United States, because I think that whether they like Trump or not is secondary. What is important is that if you bring the United States on board, you have a chance of completely overhauling the global security architecture, eliminate nuclear weapon, and really usher in, as J.D. Vance said, a new era of peace and prosperity in the world. Whereas if you go with the Western European neo-colonial option, then it's only a guarantee of permanent warfare, misery, mayhem around the world with ever more destructive weapons. So, let's hope and pray that Trump continues, never mind the rhetoric, but that he continues to eliminate the neocons in his administration, and that he continues engaging with the key powers on the Eurasian continent. Oh, I have to add another thing that I just read today, which kind of bolsters my confidence that actually Trump is on the right track, is that he recently dismantled a secretive team within the National Security Council who was tasked with formulating strategies against Russia and trying to figure out how to coerce Russia into making concessions to Ukraine and seeking to inflict strategic defeat upon Russia. So that was a team within his administration, within the National Security Council, but he apparently sacked them all and dismantled the team completely. These were people from the Treasury Department, from the intelligence community, from Pentagon, and from the State Department. And so, hopefully we've turned a corner, and longer term, we're going to see a new era of peace in the world.
I think what you mentioned about nuclear weapons is so much important, because we have the proof before our eyes. Look at the Iranian missiles hitting Israel without, just look at Oreshnik going to Ukraine. We don't need nuclear weapons. We have to get rid of them. Yeah. Thank you so much, Alex, for being with us today. Great pleasure.
You're very welcome, Nima. Always a pleasure to join you. And until the next time.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.